a lot of people have been using this particular supplement for decades, and there are definitely some potential ergogenic benefits, some performance enhancement stuff, but there are also a lot of controversial side effects. And when people are using it outside of the world of performance, specifically with trying to cope with maybe some of their daily stressors, we just want to help inform our listeners and coaches around, what it is, why it's important for coaches to understand, and ultimately what to do about it. So make sure you stick around to the end for those tactical, practical application elements. We have a nutrition and coaching psychology workshop January 18th and 19th. So we're super excited for that. We're really meshing in and we're calling it a workshop simply for the fact that it's not going to be a sit and get type of experience where you just listen to someone drone on for hours and you feel good at the time, but then you leave and a week later you're like, what the fuck did we just talk about and how do I implement that? And so this is really where we're putting our money where our mouth is, because we've been part of organizations where they said they valued application. However, they just had online coursework, and we think that that's really bullshit and it doesn't serve the greater community of coaches, and ultimately leads people to being a little more in debt from a credit card perspective, and at the same time in the same repetitive problem cycle that that a lot of coaches seem like they brush up against, which is, how do I take this and how do I monetize this skill in a way that's valuable and people are able to understand and see that value as a potential client and consumer? So nutrition and coaching psychology workshop, January 18th and 19th. And then maybe if you guys are even really nice, Steve might be willing to, and that's MLK Day weekend. So we did target a 3-day weekend, so you have some more time on the back end, but maybe you guys can convince Steve to do a call to action business building workshop that was wildly successful like the first one. If you're nice. So, Steve, anything to add around any kind of upcoming events or anything our listeners should know about?
No, I think the piece that I would really think about on this side, if you're listening, is really setting yourself up in 2025 for the type of business you want, right? Maybe it's growth, maybe it's stability, maybe it's more financial freedom, more time freedom, more of whatever. And if any of these are going to help you with that, then that means it's something you should go do. From a price perspective, we're never going to be as inexpensive as we are right now. So from a get in time, it's the time to do it. And if you have hey, I really want to solve this one thing in my business, I guarantee you the coaching psychology side of things, the call to action workshop, if we get enough people that are interested in that. I mean, last time we only wanted to have 10 people in and we had to do a little bit more. But it's really make sure we're set up for success. Chances are it's not going to necessarily be the most mind-blowing information. You're going to sit here and talk about the psychology of stuff, and you're going to hear things that are subtle changes of tonality and words and whatnot and how it comes across. And to you, it might seem simple, but to a client, it's going to be this massive shift that now enables you to create more results, retain clients for longer, get more referrals, whatever the case may be. Something as simple as that could completely change your world. So if you're working on something, you need to change something, even if it feels small, these are the things to be at. It's never going to be this cheap. So reach out, get some information. We'll be putting some more stuff out there on the email list, the newsletter. So make sure you're signed up for those, and we'll send that information your way.
Yeah, amazing. Definitely couldn't agree more. If you're stuck, you're only stuck because you're not asking for help. And that's why we're trying to bring these live events and stuff to you. So if you know of someone else that might benefit from it and it's maybe not your shtick, then we would greatly appreciate the support and making sure that we're getting in front of the appropriate people. So all that to say, let's jump in. So the topic today is cannabis. Now, I will say as a precursor, please seek any medical professional advice if you are looking to potentially engage in this stuff. If you have any kind of chronic health conditions, keep that in the back of your head. This is not necessarily for a blanket statement across everyone. We are doing most of this episode from a perspective of, again, some general physiology. How does it work? What is it? But it is definitely a buzzword inside of the health and wellness space. And we find that there's a lot of questions that are emerging of, hey, what happens if I smoke? Is that going to potentially hurt my progress? How much should I do? And these are questions that you should be informed on to a basic semblance, not necessarily like how the endocannabinoid system works, but more along the lines of just the tactical implementation. Because let's be honest, if you talk about the Krebs cycle with a client, they're probably going to glaze over. and no longer pay attention. So we're going to break that down and really discuss how this plant
Wait,
and this,
Krebs cycles are not marketing friendly, Andrew? Come on
they
now.
actually are. They are. You definitely highlight people's pain points, right? And that's marketing. So if you're highlighting someone's pain point, it's how do we make the client as bored as possible so they like engaging with us more? Gotta give them something to look forward to. Highs and lows, baby. Highs and lows.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, we're going to start segueing, and you'll see that some of these scientific ones or these more coaching-esque ones, we're going to try to follow the format in season 2 of the reason why it's important for you as our main point. The second point is the conceptual underpinnings. How exactly is this going to, like, how did this come to be? Where did it come from? How does it generally work from a base science perspective? And then main point 3 is always going to be the tactical implementation of how do you actually take this and make it useful as a coach? And how can you help improve your client outcomes or even potentially your business or marketing outcomes from that specific topic? And so in this case, we're talking about CBD, THC, the blend of that, and how it's derived from the cannabis plant. So, Steve, I know you had some opinions on there. Which one of those 3 points do you think would make the sense for
Why
you
don't why
two?
don't we save my opinions for the end?
Okay, for the end,
Yeah, let's save it for the end.
listeners, we're all in for a treat. I have no idea what he's going to say. Just so you know, he
Dude,
he loves to do this thing where sometimes he'll pop up some random topic last minute, and I'm like, okay, well, we're gonna all be waiting with bated breath. So, I guess to start with main point 1 is like, why is this important for you to understand? Well, I mean, cannabis is increasing in terms of the prevalence, in terms of how widespread it is. And it's even starting to become legal in certain areas of the country. And so this is something that as it gains ground, because it's probably going to be a matter of when, not if, especially if there are precedents where it is now legal. You just want to make sure that you're informed. And so as we're looking at that, you want to be ahead of the trends, right? And a lot of people say it's generally speaking going to be something that people use recreationally. It's something that's starting to make its way into the recovery sector. However, it has been around inside of the medicinal world for quite some time. And it's been used in things like cancer treatment specifically, where if someone's going through chemotherapy, traditionally there is going to be a lot of weight loss that occurs with that because people just really don't feel well. It messes with the GI tract and really messes with a lot of the hormones. And your hormones often influence and strongly influence your hunger signals. So if people aren't eating, if they're yakking their guts up, not to be insensitive, but if they're puking, you can imagine that it's really hard for them to want to eat. So one of the early medicinal research routes was as an appetite stimulant. And we find that there are different types of that. And I'm not going to get into the strains and all that other stuff because frankly, I'm less informed on that. I'm sure we can probably find someone that is a little more informed on what the specific, like there's like 50 million. There's like, it was like gold papa monkey punch. And you're like, what the fuck is that? Like it gets kind of crazy. So I will say hats off for the creativity perspective. But yeah, so as far as jumping into why it is important, some of the unique benefits, we find that it does help manage pain through that, what I mentioned earlier, endocannabinoid system. It's also helpful for managing some inflammation, increasing your appetite, and even potentially increasing your recovery as a byproduct or downstream effect of some of that appetite stuff. You can imagine that if you're not necessarily eating enough protein, your body's not going to have enough resources to need to repair. And you're also going to have a decrease in muscle protein synthesis, and muscle wasting might also increase because now some of those aspects of a well-balanced diet just aren't present. So basically, we're trying to do our best to make sure that you stay informed. So as far as Steve, like anything to contribute from why you think coaches might need to understand the benefits and pitfalls and risks and rewards of cannabis.
So I would kind of liken it to any other substance or thing that people are using these days. Alcohol. We talked about GLP-1s in a prior episode. If people are using peptides in general, the hormone replacement, understanding how these things generally impact somebody, the positives, the negatives, is going to just help you be a better coach, right? And you don't need to understand to the sense of being able to call it prescribe it or suggest people are taking things, but you want to know, hey, here are the things that may present themselves if this person is using this thing, in this case cannabis, THC, whatever the case may be, right? So understanding that to an extent, what is that, how does it impact perhaps their recovery, how does it impact some of their eating nutrition habits, how does it impact some of their ability to increase their metabolic function, what, like all of those things that you're working on. That's the biggest thing you need to know, and this applies to, again, everything episode about cannabis, but we need to make sure we know, what does this look like when it comes to, again, alcohol, peptides, hormones, whatever it may be. Otherwise, you're just missing out a big piece. I have no idea of this number. This is some random guess that I'm completely pulling out here. But if we look at all of these things that we could discuss, hormones, peptides, alcohol, cannabis, anything in general that somebody could be medicating with or using or supplementing with, I'd bet a greater portion of the population is doing something on some fairly consistent basis. I don't know that if it's 51% or 99%, but I would bet more than one out of every two people that you're going to see, that you're going to get an experience with from a coaching perspective, has something other than just consuming food and expending their calories, doing cardio, strength training, working, whatever it is. So knowing how they impact their lives is going to be important to your and their success with them.
Yeah. And you're going to find that, there are going to be a lot of businesses that, if you work in a brick and mortar, they're going to have these different supplements that are out. And I'm specifically referring to Lifetime right now, where they have like a CBD display cabinet right next to where you check out. So there are businesses that are going to try to recommend these things, or at least make them visible. GLP-1 agonists, and kind of, if you haven't watched the Ozempic episode yet, make sure you go back and review that one. But you just need to be aware of these things, because we always had this saying at Empowered You of learn more to earn more. And so as you're learning these things, it's going to make it seem like you are ahead of the game. And that's a very sexy thing for clients, even when the information itself may not necessarily be sexy. People want to know that they're investing their money in a resource that is continuously growing, which is why people are more likely to buy from a business that's very mature and well established, such as, you consider some of the car companies. Daewoo went out of business. Obviously, they had a weaker business kind of run, but that's kind of what knowledge certifications and continuing education represents in the coaching industry, is that it signifies a long-term stability, and again, makes a great reason why people should purchase stuff from you. So just make sure that as these things are gaining prominence, you come to the resources you find the individuals like Beyond the Pump, where we'll make sure you're informed. Or if you want to see an episode on it because you're not quite sure what to form an opinion on and you don't want to read the research, by all means, just let us know. But you do need to make sure that you have a plan in place on, if a client is going and they're insistent on integrating it, that you have a plan for that. Otherwise, it's going to fall flat on its face. And the worst thing you could do is have a client do some stuff behind your back because they don't think that you're supportive. I mean, much the same way that Steve mentioned that he had some parenting growth this weekend with his, that whole situation. Like that's the same thing with this, of you don't want to be caught with your pants down. And you definitely don't want to be, in a situation where someone does ask you a question like, well, I'm going to do it anyway. And you're like, I don't have a thing for you to make sure that you're being at least safe with it. Right. So all that to say, make sure that as you're going out there, you're not talking out of your ass. Misinformation is already rampant enough, and social media is already a huge problem. Just make sure you're being responsible. And in that vein, the legal ramifications, you have to be careful. A lot of people will say, hey, go try some THC or go try some CBD. And CBD is probably the more prevalent inside of our industry right now. But people will make these blind recommendations, and you can legally be on the hook when you're recommending that someone, if you're a remote coach and you're online, takes a supplement that might not be legal in their local area. Right? God forbid you drive home from Chattanooga, Tennessee, pick up some THC gummies for your girlfriend at the time, and then you get pulled over by Georgia State Patrol, and they're like, sir, do you have anything in the vehicle? And you're sweating and trembling, hoping that people don't pull out the drug dog. It's fine. It didn't happen, but that was a scenario that was in my head for a minute. So, But all that to say, again, please make sure that you check your legal stuff. And if you're in the online space, generally speaking, that is going to be a lot more challenging. You're going to want to check both your local stuff, your local governance laws, and wherever your client is. And if you have clients all over the country or all over the world, like they don't take that shit as a joke, especially internationally. They will lock people up for that. So please just be smart.
Yeah, I think
Anything to add to that, Steve?
well, just to drive that point home, as coaches, there are things very much so that are in scope and out of scope, right? And every every law is different in every state, in every country, in a lot of different places, and it is, I'll say, impossible. There's going to be one person that's going to say, "I know the law is everywhere," but it is, generally speaking, for the average coach to go out there, impossible for you to know what is okay in every single place. If you're having a conversation around THC, or you're having a conversation around CBD, or a conversation around alcohol or peptides or GLP-1s or any of the things, you should know for certain that with where that person is, you can have that conversation with them and that you're advising them appropriately according to the law. And if you don't know for certain, you need to lead every single conversation off like we did with a, hey, go consult a person who is qualified to do so, and make sure that these things are appropriate, etc. And I also think that there's a level of a lot of what you're talking about is probably going to be from experience. You want to come out and hang out and have a really delicious old fashioned, I can do that with you because of experience of making delicious old fashions. Then we'll jump to paper planes and it's going to be amazing. But I'm not the right person to go have conversations around cannabis use because it's something I've never done, right? So I understand those things, but I would turn around and say, hey, I have a whatever, doctor, friend, trusted source, whoever, who has or does or exists or helps or coaches or something. And I might refer over or at least ask for kind of that consult, if you will. So make sure you know from a legal perspective what you should and shouldn't be doing. It is something that can be extremely serious if you're not smart about it.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, there's a reason why we have trusted sources because those people traditionally have more information or they've spent a designated amount of time learning about something, and that's not to say that they have a monopoly on that information. And I've definitely provided research articles that might have gotten me in trouble had I directly recommended or created a protocol around that stuff, but when I just provide the research article, that's one of the workarounds of making sure that you are helping to educate your client on their options without necessarily absorbing all that risk. Because it's like, here's the information. What do you think you should do with that? And that's kind of where the client-centered approach really helps mitigate risk. And that's why we talk about that inside of our coaching psychology workshop that, you know, again, if you're not registered for that and you're interested, I would strongly encourage you. That's probably the best course that I've ever written. So the last thing here is the misinformed use is definitely something you want to be aware of, right? You want to make sure that you have the appropriate dosages, that you have the appropriate strains, that you have, you know, different things like that, at least some kind of awareness of. And if you don't, then again, barring all of the legal stuff, and we're just moving beyond legal stuff right now, right? We've already made the disclaimers. We're getting into some of the other informational items around that. I generally suggest working with a naturopath or a functional medicine doctor. They seem like they have a little more integration with some of that stuff and those modalities. So strongly encourage you to potentially explore that. You partner with them a couple times, you build a relationship. A, you're going to get more referrals, and B, you're going to make sure that your clients have what they need to succeed. And it's going to be a diagnostic-based approach, meaning that that person's not just going to be like, hey, here's some THC. I'm like, hey, let's look at some assessments. Let's look at some labs. Let's look at whatever. And it just might be part of their protocol profile after that. So legal risks, misinformed use is another set of risks. There's three other things that we just want to kind of gloss over really quickly just for the sake of time. But performance impairment can definitely be something that you should be aware of, especially if you're in the fitness space. If you are a strength and conditioning coach and you're recommending that someone, like you have an athlete that comes to you and they're like, hey, coach, I'm really tired today. I'm kind of, motor, can't say that word. They're a motor moron that day. And you're like, gosh, what's going on? And turns out they've been trying to potentially engage with some cannabinoid or some cannabis type supplementation at night. They're taking gummies to get some sleep. Turns out that it can actually negatively affect your motor skills, your coordination, your reaction time. And so you're potentially going to, in the athletic population, right, not the Gen Pop population, although that will show up sometimes inside of training sessions where you find that someone just isn't quite moving well or something's off. That's where you want to make sure you're screening for those things at the beginning during your consultation, as well as when you're like, hey, chatting them up during your session. How was your week? What are you doing? Did you have any drinks? Did you smoke anything? They're like, aha, I just do gummies, right? You're like, okay, well, you're going to need some training because you're going to suck at this movement for a very long time. Good business principle. So make sure you refer early and often. But just kidding. But just make sure you're being responsible for that, right? People can get habituated. So this is where we talk about dependency. And dependency is something that, and by the way, when we look at coordination, we look at energy, we look at all these things. Generally speaking, someone's considered habituated when they do, and they kind of dose this stuff more than twice a month, right? To give you a barometer. We know that binge drinking is considered more than 4 drinks in a single sitting, right? You might have a drinking problem if you're doing that 4 or 5 nights a week and you're drinking, in excess of probably 15 to 20 drinks. Like you probably should have some kind of stress conversation, right? But it's the same thing with THC. If you're doing it on a weekly basis, even, you find that you're actually going to have a higher tolerance, which means you may need to increase your dosage to get the same effect. And that then starts to create this snowball effect where you need more in order to get that benefit. And that's where you might have these hangovers. You might start to notice that, especially with cognitive function, it is definitely correlated with having poor memory. So if you are a habitual user, you might find it's actually going to mess with your verbal cognitive stuff. And that's, for most people, especially in team environments, a really big performance detriment that can impact not just yourself, but the rest of the team and the culture even, if repetitive stuff happens in that. And then last thing is that as we're going through these 5 potential risks of legal, misinformed use, performance impairment, dependency concerns, and health risks, high doses, so people that do get habituated, the same way that you can have cardiac palpitations and stuff if you have too much caffeine, well, increased or excessive uses of THC can lead to things like paranoia, anxiety, dizziness, which then obviously, when you consider what that implies for training, doesn't necessarily lend itself to the best performance outcomes. And we know that if the amount of high effort and high intensity that you put into an activity is going to dictate your return on that, you're probably going to want to make sure you can do that as often as possible. And so when you nip away at some of those margins by doing stuff like this repetitively, you're going to find that you're going to have to work harder for longer, and you might even have to occasionally take more rest periods, which then is going to decrease your overall amount of effort that you can put in on a weekly basis. So that's more or less some of the reasons why you just want to be aware of walking into this, why having a conversation with your clients around extensive use of cannabis can actually be something that might be problematic. So, Steve, anything else that you have from a potential risks perspective? This might be a good time for you to.
So, rant coming a little bit early. I won't make you guys wait till the end of the soapbox. But, and this is coming from somebody who, I mean, Andrew, when you first met me, I had a drink, 5 nights a week? Ish.
Yeah, after. Yeah.
Somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
And not that I was going and getting sloshed every night, but I definitely had 1 or 2 drinks a night, 5 nights a week. And I think in the health and wellness industry, specifically as it relates to cannabis, a lot of coaches go down the road of, I'm going to go ahead and smoke or chew a gummy or, consume it however, because it is a calorie-free way to indulge in something and ultimately kind of change, call it your life and your perspective for a period of time. Well, Andrew just laid out there that if this is something where we're dosing and doing it more than twice per month, that could be considered, hey, there's a dependency being built. My rant is, if you're a grown adult, and to be clear, a grown adult is somebody who has some level of responsibilities. Somebody else is no longer paying for your life. And you show up every single day completely reliant on something, then there's probably something you need to be thinking about. And this is the conversation you need to have with your clients as well. If you're a grown adult, you have kids, you have a house, you have mortgages, you have bills, you have all these pieces, all of these things, again, alcohol, cannabis, hormone use, whatever it might be, those things are an early signal that you need to go figure something out. Again, I've never indulged in cannabis in my life. So I'm a little bit naive in the statement of like, hey, I don't do it, blah, blah, blah. And I obviously have beliefs behind that. And we'll get into those at some point in time in the future. But as you're going down this road, you yourself, as the coach, need to be aware of your own kind of tendencies, because I've been in environments where it's like, oh yeah, we do it every single night to go to bed. And I'm like, that doesn't sound healthy. Okay, cool. But same thing for your clients. If they're doing it every single night, and again, you're not qualified to have this, hey, what's wrong with your life conversation, but it is a signal that that conversation with somebody might need to happen. And just throwing this out there, coaches, hey, maybe it's you. Totally cool. We've all been there. I just shared that I was there. Now, if I have one drink every, other week, maybe, like that's the amount of alcohol I consume. And I love a delicious cocktail. I don't drink just to drink, right? Not that I ever have. I've always enjoyed it, but just be aware. This is my throwing out there to coaches. I feel as though in this industry, it is an abused thing because it doesn't add to our calories. So it's kind of viewed as oh yeah, it's the way for me to escape my life. Well, hey, if you're having to escape your life daily or frequently, like what's going on? Let's address that piece and let's try to solve that problem. So this is throwing it out there for coaches. Also, coaches, be aware of this with your clients. Might be worth having a loving conversation just as a, hey, how can I help? And I might know somebody that can help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. As we start to shift gears here to main point two of like what exactly is going on when we use cannabis and how does it generally function? Like everything else, we mentioned that the twice a month is the point where your body kind of gets used to it and where you're using it weekly. Like this is where we started getting in a dosage. I think we're looking at 2 to 5 milligrams is considered like the appropriate dose. And when people are taking gummies and, doing these things that are in excess of 10, 15, 20 milligrams, like it really is an unpleasant experience. And I can personally speak to, I've never done this for the federal law enforcement agencies that are listening, nor the local ones. But hypothetically, if I ever did do a gummy on several instances, and I happened to have a big block of a gummy that was 200 milligrams, and I cut it into 16 different little pieces, how many milligrams did I take when I took one piece? I'm just kidding. I just wanted to, it felt like it was a good opportunity to turn that into a 5th grade math problem. But the answer is Andrew got dizzy as fuck, and it was not fun. But yeah, I definitely got the spins, cotton mouth, all that other stuff. So those are just the things that like unpleasant, pleasantness that comes with that. You just want to make sure that you understand how some of this stuff works. So we've mentioned that this term cannabis, obviously like interchangeable with weed, and there are different strains of that stuff that have different amounts of 2 of the bioactive chemicals or ingredients, I should say, one of which is THC and the other is CBD. So THC is the one that's generally more psychoactive, and that's the thing that will cause you to feel high. And that's where, generally speaking, like you find that's a little bit higher in strains of sativa. And then you have the indica strains, which are a little more CBD heavy, and they basically create a little more of a relaxation response. So one tends to be a little more stimulating, the other tends to be a little more relaxing. But basically the way it works is that THC interacts with CB1 receptors, which ultimately are things that are responsible for messing with your mood and your perception, right? So you can imagine that if you're overdosing, and I say overdosing in not necessarily a Narcan type way, but more along the lines of like you're just taking too much, you're going to find that your mood, which actually does improve, that is mildly supported in literature, right? And your perception of different things is definitely going to be altered, which makes things like operating motor vehicle, getting to practice. Like I know people that will smoke before they go run, and frankly, I think it's dumb. Well, it's stupid because stupid is where you do things that you shouldn't do. But it's stupid because now you're going to alter your ability and your motor function and your coordination and all these things. And if you're going to practice, like it's kind of the same idea of why are athletes taking ibuprofen, which is going to decrease some of their potential ability to recover from that activity or have the, and when I say recover, I mean positively recover, having the benefits of doing that thing. It just doesn't make sense, right? And this is pretty rampant in child sports, or I shouldn't say child sports, but like travel sports. You find that these travel club teams are like, oh, just go pop some ibuprofen and get on with your day. You're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, that's a problem. That system is going to break. And so to reference earlier again, like you can only cover these things up for so long, but CBD is the other bioactive component inside of cannabis, and it interacts with something called a CB2 receptor, which is linked to inflammation and immune response. And so while you want to think about it like this, is the CBD basically offers non-intoxicating benefits, while THC actually may impair your performance because that tends to be the more psychoactive one. So this is where you just want to make sure that if you are going to engage with that, you're just aware of what that balance may look like. And I don't unfortunately have the specific, ratios or anything like that because again, not really a heavy user, but we do just want to make sure that we have those conversations. And I'm not usually one that recommends this. Because I do tend to be a little more of the talk therapy type of coach because I think that is important. Now, as far as applications for recovery, we know that CBD, again, anti-inflammatory properties are the main benefit for this. Now, anti-inflammatory, people think inflammation's bad and it really catches this rap, and I think that that's really a misinformed decision because when you work out, you generate an immune cascade. The same way that when you have a scratch that's healing, your body has to create inflammation, which is why redness, you have these eicosanoids, prostaglandins, all this stuff flushes into that area to start the repair process. Imagine if you worked out and you had a really sore bicep and that soreness never went away. That'd be a problem. That'd be pretty shitty. And so you want to have inflammation because it basically helps clear that stuff out and repair that. So when you consider doing CBD around training, this is where if you're trying to break a muscle down, because we know that there are three things that will cause muscle growth, right? We call mechanical tension, metabolic stress, and muscle damage. Those are the three things. And if we're creating an anti-inflammatory response, we're going to decrease or attenuate a lot of those potential benefits. And like, this is why people that smoke a lot tend to look like they smoke a lot, right? But not everybody. So just be aware that you might be undermining some of the hard work that you're putting in the fitness stuff, or your clients might be if they're the ones that are using it. And that might be one of the big obstacles that as a coach you'll brush up against for people that are medicating that way. Now, from a psychoactive perspective, sometimes you might need to have people actually move while they're in pain, and that might actually help them have less pain down the road. So THC could potentially be helpful for helping those clients manage that chronic pain. But you do just want to be mindful of that dosage. And again, we're talking about like 2 to 5 milligrams is traditionally the things that are looked at inside of a lot of the literature. But generally speaking, those are concentrated doses. So just be aware, right? Signs and symptoms, again, just to make sure that you are aware of things that you should be paying attention to. Contraindications is what we call that. How do you know when someone shouldn't take it? Ultimately, dizziness, right? That's generally something that isn't going to be conducive to stacking on another psychoactive component. Probably not a good idea. Paranoia or drug interaction. So if someone is on a lot of medications and they're on that what's called polypharmacology, which is multiple medications, they might have something called adverse drug interactions. So you can go to drugs.com and ultimately type in all the things that someone's taking. You can see if there's going to be a negative effect of one on the other. And it's very important for you as you're continuing to advocate and potentially even going with your clients to their medical appointments. If that's your shtick, we are building a health coaching licensure certification track that will be live and be licensed, I'd say, end of Q3, beginning of Q4 next year. That stuff will be done. And so you want to make sure that if you are going to be in those medical facilities, which is a phenomenal place to be in, honestly, where a lot of the coaching industry is going to find itself moving towards. If you're not on that bandwagon, get the fuck on. But you're going to want to make sure that you are informed of like, hey, doc, these are the things that this person's taking. These are some concerns that I have as their person that's seeing them, as their allied health professional that sees them, on a weekly, daily, whatever basis. Were you aware? And a lot of times physicians aren't even aware that the med stack that they're on, that specific client, might be contributing to other types of issues that might starting to manifest. So I kind of liken it to if you have a hole in the bottom of your boat and you just plug the thing, or like you just kind of spackle over it real quick, and that there's going to be another leak that's going to happen somewhere else because it might be the integrity of the entire structure, not just that one little spot. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, ultimately, you just want to make sure that your people are on dosages as well. All right, so that basically wraps up main point 2, which is what are the underpinnings? Why is this relevant? Which we talked about in section 1, and so now we're moving into the last section here, which is like the tactical ways, the tactical takeaways, and how do we apply this stuff? Well, pain management is definitely going to be something that you're going to want to consider partnering with an allied health professional, a naturopathic doctor. That seems to be in their shtick more. If you do happen to work in the oncology stuff, probably figure out, and coordinate that. By the way, cancer training is very lucrative, and it's a great, great way to help people that genuinely need it, and they're probably going to be pretty receptive to it. So if you're looking to find your niche, that could be helpful. Things that you could use for that, there are a lot of CBD balms that do have some mild efficacy. That is pretty helpful for some people. It's kind of like thinking about like Bengay, same. Right. Recovery optimization is going to be helpful from low doses of CBD. Notice CBD is the thing, right? Not THC. That doesn't necessarily have the anti-inflammatory properties to really reduce some of that soreness or that muscle damage, right? And the last thing is potentially leveraging cannabis that is a little more THC heavy to stimulate people that need to eat. So if you're a hard gainer, which I still haven't really run into any of those, they just generally have really shitty feeding frequency issues. But people that are hard gainers that need to eat more, or maybe people that need to gain weight in general, you can use something like a THC to stimulate that appetite. And if you think about the term the munchies, that's probably a positive thing. You just want to make sure that you have the appropriate food sources that are a little more nutrient dense around the house to make sure that they're getting the appropriate nutrients in. Right now, pitfalls to avoid. Make sure you pay attention here because you want to avoid overuse of THC because you will decrease someone's ability to have good coordinated movement. And also at the same time, they're probably not going to make the best decisions because they're going to have some impaired cognition, right? And then the last thing is just make sure that you are aware of both your local and federal laws to make sure that you don't get rolled up, because if you piss off a client and 20% of your clients will cause 80% of your problems, and you're like, oh man, this person isn't getting great sleep, let me go ahead and recommend this, and then somehow, weirdly enough, they get worse sleep, and then they decide to go after you, like that's not great. Don't fuck with people that don't get enough sleep because they're generally very unpleasant in my experience of it. And so that means that lastly, the contraindications you need to watch out for, make sure that they're not dizzy, anxious, or having some motor moron outcomes, because that's definitely going to be an issue. And if your client does have mental health issues, you want to make sure that they're not going to come into the equation with already a really high level of anxiety or paranoia, because if you take THC, that is something that is implicated in some of those higher doses. So all that to say, I mean, Steve, anything to add as we wrap up and kind of brush up against the hour here?
No, I think it's really just at the end of the day, be smart about it. Cannabis in general, but any supplement, I'll call it in general, would fall under the bucket of just be smart. I like what you said about not giving off so much of an opinion that people would necessarily hide things per se from you as a coach, because obviously if you don't know certain things going on, you don't know the full picture, and that means at best you're going to be 1% right. Like, it's just one of those situations where you need to be able to be open-minded. I would be a bad coach for somebody who wanted to go and smoke pot every single day, just because of that, right? But I think keep an open mind. Know that you need to understand enough to understand the impacts in your world and your coaching, but also know when and where that line is, when you need to refer out to somebody who's going to be more qualified to discuss, suggest, recommend, whatever it may be with the thing that you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, to wrap it up from my end, like cannabis it's a potentially helpful tool, but like everything else, I mean, it's a hammer. Are you going to try to screw something in with a hammer? No, it wouldn't make the most sense. So you just need to make sure that you're staying informed and you're continuing to stay up on the research. And if you don't know where to go for that stuff, again, we're great resources for that. There's also a lot of great researchers that we'll link in the thing below. But at the end of the day, it's impossible to learn everything. So the best thing you can do is go find trusted resources, like Empowered You, like Beyond the Pump, like even if you're a client and you're looking for another coaching organization, Join Beyond Coaching is our sister company that does a really great job of actually helping bridge the gap of community and great program design. So So all that to say, thanks for being here. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, and definitely if you have someone that you think would benefit from this information, get this over to them. We really appreciate the support. And yeah, I think that's all we got for you today. So until next time.
Peace.
Peace.